Thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion on the joys and pains of transit-oriented development. So I'm going to start off by providing an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. And it's hard to argue. I think we will all agree that transit-oriented development is really key to unlocking housing supply in Canada, and we all have a role to play. So I've invited two industry leaders to share with us today. We're going to start off with a presentation by myself, just providing an overview about the housing problem and some creative ideas to solve it. Liana is going to provide an overview on the design perspective. And she is going to be sharing with us about 10 slides and about a 10-minute presentation. Derek is going to do the same. He's going to be providing an overview on the financial feasibility perspective. And overall, we're going to be having about a 30-minute presentation and lots of time at the end for a Q&A. So I want to just go ahead and say thank you all so much for joining us. We have a very diverse group of people who are here today representing very important stakeholders in delivering housing. We have representatives from REITs and development organizations, municipal and provincial organizations. We have TransLink, nonprofit organizations represented. We have brokers, we have builders, we have designers, engineers, environmental consultants. So I'm really proud of the group that we have here and the conversation that we're going to be having today. With the diversity of representation that we have from the industry, I just want to encourage everyone to actively participate in the chat. And please ensure that your comments are respectful and that you bring curiosity to the different perspectives that we have here in the room. Some of you submitted some great questions by email. Thank you so much. I've endeavored to try and cover them off at a high level in the slides. If you feel like you have more that you'd like to understand, feel free to ask in the chat, or we could follow up following the session. At the back half of the hour, as I mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A, and I'm really looking forward to that component of our day today. So thank you again, and I'm going to go ahead and start off with my presentation. So a land acknowledgement. I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And on the heels of International Women's Day, I wanted to recognize the importance of restoring Indigenous matriarchy in reconciliation in Canada. In my talk today, I'm going to start with a bit of an origin story so that you understand where I'm coming from. I'm going to dive into my background and the why for this discussion. I'm going to talk about development feasibility, the framework Channel Consulting uses, and why I think it's important for unlocking housing supply in Canada. I'm going to talk about the housing problem, policy, lessons we're learning from other cities, a few personal anecdotes, and then I'll touch on the housing statutes. Within that context, I'm proud to share a little bit with you about the Uplift Fund, which is a new initiative that I've launched in 2024. So to start a little bit about me, I'm honored that my work has received industry recognition. Over the past 25 years, I've been working as an urban planner, and my background in land development has certainly equipped me to tackle complex challenges. Land development is difficult, and my clients are struggling with interest rates, construction costs, the labor shortage, and what they really want is to be more certain about approvals, the timelines, the costs. And so with no easy sites left in Canada, my work is really focused on unlocking housing supply to address unaffordability. So over the past nearly 5 years since starting my company, we developed a development feasibility framework that is really the spine of everything that we do. The development feasibility framework has been used in our work with countless REITs and developers, government organizations, and nonprofit groups, receiving feedback from investment committees, capital committees, and boards. And the framework has become that strong foundation of our development feasibility studies, our development consulting, and our advisory program, the Approval Accelerator. But it's also the framework that is the foundation of the new initiative in 2024, which is the Uplift Fund. And the Uplift Fund is bringing private capital to unlock transit-oriented sites in Canada. I'm going to share more about that in a few minutes. So the housing problem, it's enormous. According to CMHC, 5.8 million new homes are needed in Canada by 2023 to keep pace with immigration demand and population growth. To do this amounts to about double of the number of units needing to be delivered in a single year compared to the highest year that we've ever delivered in Canada. So for context, we have about 5 million people living in British Columbia, about 3 million in the Lower Mainland, and there are about 5.9 million people living in the Greater Toronto Area. So even though some of our new immigrants to Canada and some of our existing residents in Canada are going to choose to move to rural and small communities, we know that most will go to urban centers because that's where the economic activity is. So there's a huge need for city building and a city building initiative that will allow Canada to remain competitive globally for labor and for quality talent. And so if we want that kind of Canada, then I believe we have no choice but to address the housing problem. So the federal and provincial governments are looking to municipalities to be part of the solution. And the province of BC recently introduced about 20 new pieces of legislation. At the same time, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has done a report, and they have estimated that the cost of delivering infrastructure to deliver new housing units in Canada is about $107,000 per unit. So now on a lighter topic, some fun. So I really believe that a global perspective is key for Canada to address the housing problem. And so really my own travel experiences have informed my experience as an urban planner. In June, I'm going to be going to Oslo, Stockholm, Copenhagen. When I get back, I'll share those reflections through my blog, over email. But for me, the important themes that I've had from my travels to Melbourne and Barcelona and Tokyo and London are around public art, well done heritage interface, density, diversity of design, mixed uses, pedestrian orientation, public space quality, small space living like in Tokyo, and also multimodal access. And that's me on a line bike in London at this time last year. Whether you're based in Toronto or Vancouver, it's important to be aware that BC's legislature passed about 20 pieces of new legislation last fall. And actually, the National Housing Task Force just issued a report last week with 140 recommendations, and many of those recommendations reflect the kind of initiatives that are in the new legislation in British Columbia. For those of you that want to do a deep dive into the housing statutes, it's a very important topic, but there's a lot to cover. You can use this QR code to access a past webinar that I did specifically on this topic. ULI Toronto also hosted a webinar last Friday, and there's a recording available on their website where we also covered what Ontario can learn from the new housing statutes in British Columbia. So I'm going to cover this for today at a very high level and in a nutshell. But in a nutshell, Bill 44, these are known as the 3 housing statutes. Well, there are some other pieces of legislation, for example, around short-term rentals. The key to be aware of is that these are known as the 3 housing statutes that you'll read about in the newspaper regularly. And so Bill 44 really focuses on long-term planning and the small unit housing initiative. And so this is really focused on allowing 4 to 6 units on single family lots that meet a minimum property dimension and putting that zoning in place. Bill 44 is also about long-term planning, and it provides policy directions around approvals for residential developments that are consistent with the official community plan. Bill 46 is based on development financing. So that's to help get more certainty with your development project about what are the costs associated with infrastructure. And Bill 47 is about the transit-oriented areas. The province has produced a transit-oriented area guideline, and I recommend reading through that on the provincial website. Just because you're identified in a transit-oriented area doesn't mean you have zoning. You'll still have to go through a rezoning in order to make sure that the infrastructure is in place. So just one more comment on the legislation is that it's going to get messy. It's going to be very messy over the next couple of years as municipalities try to make sense of the legislation. As the legislation gets tidied up, there's a lot of things that are being discovered as it's being implemented. But my view, and in the webinar on Friday with ULI Toronto, the view of the development community and of a municipal CAO is that over the long term, it's a good thing for housing supply in British Columbia. So now I'm going to talk about really what I've learned in 25-year career is that partnerships are essential to enable housing units to come online easily. Partnerships are essential. So this is really the framework that I use for my development feasibility. We start by discovering the issues and opportunities that are associated with the site. We then strategize on how to overcome those issues and engage with stakeholders on the basis of what we've learned from strategizing and engaging. Then we unearth solutions and we develop a plan to deliver. So you'll notice that the lion's share of the thinking happens during the discover, strategize, and engage part. And from there, we find the solutions, plan, and deliver. So given the current cost of building projects in Vancouver and Toronto and many Canadian cities, we find that groups like REITs, pension funds, insurance companies are nearly the only ones that have pockets deep enough to build housing at scale. For many, but not all of these groups, their investment criteria is that a project must be shovel ready. So an essential step in unlocking housing supply is to generate shovel-ready projects. And that's what the Uplift Fund is all about. So over the past 6 to 9 months, I've been working on developing a solution that will enable housing units to come online more easily in order to address the scale of housing that is needed in Canada. And this is really about using my Channel Consulting development feasibility framework for due diligence. So I've got a list of investors and I'm actively evaluating opportunities against our investment criteria. And once we have the right opportunity, we're ready to go. So these are our investment objectives. As I mentioned, to invest in the entitlement phase of development, to unlock multifamily development projects that will result in on the scale of 100 to 400 units, distributing capital to investors once there's conditional zoning in place, and generating investment returns that reflect the risk that's taken by these investors in going through the entitlement process. So the investment criteria are really focused on those locations where government has committed to rapid transit infrastructure, where there's a sophisticated proven development partner in place, where the parcel size is adequate for that scale of development, and where there's an asset that is well positioned for acquisition, to generate an asset that's well positioned for acquisition. And so this is the investment process that we go through. Again, you'll see here how critical partnerships are to coming up with totally new ideas that help us unlock housing supply and address unaffordability. So it's really important that we're introduced to projects and we're introduced to investors And so if you do have a project or an investor or are interested in finding out more, you can go to upliftfund.ca. So my key takeaways. Here are the key lessons and takeaways that I wanted to offer with you today. We need to build the equivalent of a new city in Canada by 2023 to keep pace with immigration and population growth. And new ways of thinking are essential to solve a crisis. We need to be learning from world cities. And I'm using my development feasibility framework to help address the problem through partnerships and facilitating those partnerships through Uplift Fund. On April 9th, I'm going to be doing another webinar where we'll do a deep dive about development feasibility. And if you wish to be on the list for that session, you can use this QR code. I also welcome to reach out to me if you are interested in doing a 15-minute development feasibility game plan. You can use the QR code for that. And again, I really want to thank you for joining us today. I'm really proud and excited to have Liana joining us, and I'm now going to pass it on to her to talk about development feasibility.
Thanks, Tegan. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here to speak about something that's very close and near to our hearts at SVN. And I'll just pull up my slides here for you. So my name is Liana Bressler. I'm a principal at SVN. We're a multidisciplinary design firm located in Toronto, Vancouver, and Mexico City. We work across these 4 pillars that kind of contain a lot of our work. There's a team of 160 of us, architects, urban designers, planners, and landscape architects, all working together jointly on projects. We work in projects that are, typically innovating, kind of meaningful, transformational projects. We like to pair ourselves ideally with clients that see themselves as city builders and are prepared to tackle what we think are the 2 biggest challenges that are in front of us today. The first one, I think Tegan articulated so well, the housing crisis. That's, a huge obstacle for Canada's growth and something we need to think about in everything we do. And the second is the climate crisis. And the topic for today, TOD, is really sits kind of squarely between those 2 issues and tries to address them both as we, need to provide housing in a sustainable way near transit and at the same time encourage the use of transit. So TOD is kind of very central to our work in tackling these 2 very important issues of the day. Some of our work, a lot of our work is at SVN looks at TOD that's what we call structurally integrated TOCs. And I offer this as sort of a starting point, but I actually would like to kind of move away into development. But just to know that one of the big projects that we have currently and working on today is the Ontario line, a new line led by the provincial government initiative that's going across Toronto through the downtown and up to the more northern areas of the city. And I think projects like this are, typically led by transit agencies, by government. We know that this is something that's very much a topic of discussion in Vancouver and BC, it's initiated, like I said, typically by kind of more from the government end, but so today, speaking about like opportunities in and around that, I just wanted to offer that projects that maybe don't start this way could kind of evolve into something that's actually integrated. So when we look at project like this, the main thing we try to tackle is how to align the timeline of transit development with the timeline of development of real estate, which don't really align in terms of scale and time. And that's the big challenge. There are technical challenges here. To offer that, I'm happy to answer any questions about it. But where we really wanted to focus today is actually looking at example of a transit adjacent development. This is a project we have currently in Mississauga for Taz Impact, a developer that's focused in the Toronto area. Connecting Cooksville is a pretty transformational kind of a project in Mississauga. Mississauga is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. And this project will transform what is currently a giant parking lot that sits near the regional rail GO station into a TOD development that has mixed use development, interior streets, and a regenerative landscape right at the heart of it. It's pretty key to the concept. And I'll use this as an example of the kind of thinking that we bring to the design of TOD and what you might think if that's something that you're looking at developing to kind of keep at the core of your strategy. So this site is pretty kind of prime location between three modes of transit, the GO regional rail at the kind of top end here, the Hurontario LRT that's currently under construction and the kind of big dash purple cutting across, and then the future BRT bus rapid transit on Dundas Street. So the kind of pink site in the middle was the original site owned by the developer, and they've actually purchased from Metrolinx, the transit agency here, the kind of L parcel around it, and that was our starting point. And the first thing we looked at is really the kind of key opportunity in TOD sites, which is connecting, development to ridership, and that symbiotic relationship of, contributing ridership to the transit, something that obviously transit agencies are very interested in, but also, bringing people into your development from the transit. And with a third party, we did research that looked at the users of the three transit modes that I was just sharing. What is their profile, and when are their hours of travel? How are they arriving at the site, and kind of mapping that out through their weekly patterns and through the day. And you'll see on the left that it's actually that daily ritual and kind of connecting to the sunlight was important in our thinking of how we developed the site. So that kind of very rider-centric hub was at the very start, at the very core of the thinking on the project. And you can see in how the plan developed that these connections are really driving the design here. So that's a key consideration in bringing that ridership into the development. You can see the plan kind of opens up to draw people in from the three directions of the three modes of transit. And it's part of this kind of system thinking that we think is very crucial for TOD. So thinking about the system that's maybe existing or a system that is to come, and what will develop around the transit. Some might be there, and some you'd have to kind of speculate as to what would develop. And it's important in a number of ways. If you kind of apply system thinking, it leads not only to kind of better design and kind of drawing the people in, as I was mentioning, but it's also, often a strategy for the planning, for the approvals. So it helps with streamlining that. It helps with, working with stakeholders. I think Tegan emphasized the importance of that. That's certainly true for every development, but even more so with TOD when you're kind of by necessity engaging with other stakeholders. So if you can kind of plug into the system thinking and kind of make your site work, then you're optimizing it, and that's ultimately great design. And then the question is like kind of what are you drawing people to? So Here, again, learning from the profile of the users and working with stakeholders, we developed this central plaza that's public, that's offered as an important amenity to the public, and connects them to really important amenities, a community center that includes an aquatic center, a library, both developed with in partnership with the city of Mississauga. So important draws for this specific community that kind of elevate the development and also, you know, help increase the ridership too, as I was noting. And all of that situated around really an urban forest as a critical amenity to the community as well, which leads me maybe to a last point of consideration in your thinking on TOD, which applies to, I think, maybe development more broadly, but is that more is not always better in terms of the development envelope. I think it's important to maximize and to kind of build as much as we can in the context of the housing crisis, but I think maybe leading into hopefully what Derek will talk about is a pro forma is in the rising, you know, in the world of rising construction costs, just building more because you can is not necessarily the right thing when you think about podiums we design. Sometimes they're kind of like large, they're not very usable, they're kind of dark floor spaces, and sometimes actually carving a bit away at the maybe mass you're trying to optimize gives room for things that really enhance the quality of the development and make it a better development and a better transit-oriented development. And that's giving room for the connection for the ridership and for the public. And here's just a shot of that in another central space.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I guess we'll share my screen, Leanna. Appreciate that. All right. Hi, everybody. Derek Stephen with Grey Corp. I got a thumbs up? You guys can see my screen? Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm just going to link to what Tegan said. She said that we need 5.8 million new homes. CMHC said we need 5.8 million new homes by 2030. Little math on that. If it costs us about $1,000 a square foot to build, that's Vancouver, so land's a bit more maybe, and construction costs are a bit more than the average. So take that in a grain of salt. That is $4 trillion in construction, no developer profit, by 2030. I work for Grey Corp, which is a division of Graham Construction. We are one of Canada's largest construction companies, and we do $4 billion a year in total construction. So the housing problem is 1,000 times worse than one of Canada's largest construction companies, 4 billion to 4 trillion with no developer profit. So this is a bigger problem than the private market. This is a bigger problem than the public market. This is it's going to be a continued problem for years to come. We're not fixing this by 2030. So I'll stop there. I'm just going to give a little overview on Grey Corp, maybe a bit about my background, and talk a little bit about some of the underwritings that we do. So Graham Construction is a century-old business out of the prairies in Canada. We have North American footprint. Our major divisions are vertical construction, buildings, industrial, infrastructure, water, and then what we do, development. Grey Corp being a division of, we have projects in Vancouver, Seattle, and Calgary. We merchant ourselves, we partner with institutional capital, families, and the like. We do have a big focus on the multifamily space and transit-oriented sites. A little bit about what we've built, some things that Graham has built, some things that Grey Corp and Graham have built together, but we're focused on this space. Grey Corp, in our markets, we have about 3,000 purpose-built rental in the pipeline, either being built or about to be built. So Tegan, when she called to talk about the session, said, maybe focus on capital stack considerations. So happy to talk My background, just before we get into this really briefly, I was Bank of Montreal for a decade in their corporate finance group, ran a book of a few $1 billion, which included a lot of hospitality, seniors care, major publicly traded pizza companies, and the like. So that's my background. Been here for 3 years, managing our capital stacks at Grey Corp. So the information here today is purposefully dated. So when you snicker at $400 hard, I'm not out to lunch. I'm purposefully dating my information just for confidentiality reasons. So,
Derek, do you have slides that you're going
oh,
to?
are they not showing?
They're not showing.
Share
Thank you.
screen. Okay, was it? Oh, maybe it skipped. There you go. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna have to go back. Can you guys see that now, or is that
Not quite yet.
okay? How's that?
Yes, we see them.
You see rental rate trends? Is that what you see?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I go like that, did it go full screen? Or maybe that's what happened. I went full screen. That's embarrassing. Okay, so if I go back, can you see me going back, Graham Group? Can you see
That's
that?
great. Yep.
Okay,
Perfect.
well, great intro. Terrible IT. I apologize. This is my fault. Graham Group, North American footprint. That was the point of this slide. Graham Group projects. Here's some of our multifamily experience, if you will, in Canada. And then capital stack considerations. So now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So there you go. Apologies for that. Thank you, Tegan. So, you know, I mentioned earlier, looking into what Tegan was saying about supply and demand effectively. And, you know, I'm personally of the view, we're not going to have enough supply. So what's going to happen? Rents are going to go up. So, you know, you take stats from CMHC, you take this one specific neighborhood. We've done some acquisitions here recently in Kitsilano, and we've effectively increased rent by 40% over a 10-year period. And that's only substantially getting worse since 2021. And that is a pure fact of supply and demand. But when we pick neighborhoods that we're looking to invest in, you know, what I would say is concrete doesn't care if you're in, you know, Timbuktu or if you're in Kitsilano, it's going to be the same price relatively. So we try to find neighborhoods that we have positive rental trends, that are attractive to investors, have staying power, are not pioneering neighborhoods or infill, if you will. So that's a really critical element when we're taking a look at our capital stack. The next thing that, you know, capital is very concerned about is balanced policy. Are we in an area where you know, municipalities, provincial governments are supportive of this product type, multifamily rental, or is it going to be a challenge? Because time, as you'll see later in the presentation, impacts just as much as interest rates, as cap, as hard cost. Time is critical element. So we look for you know, areas that will have support from policymakers for this product type. Us at Grey Corp and Graham, we're not extractive. We're not going somewhere and saying we want 40 stories when it's OCP'd for 20. We're just going to go for the 20 and make sure that what we build works for that area and what the city wants. And then we find that you know, makes for a more positive relationship with the policymakers. You know, Broadway Plan as an example, something that we've got 4 or 5 towers going right now. It's a great plan. It works from a financial perspective, from a city, from what the city wants and what capital wants. So happy to keep investing in that area. So at the end of the day, from a capital stack, it's what's your revenue, what's your cost, what's your cap rate, what's your return. Simple stuff. A little bit about financial return sensitivities. So this again is dated. So, you know, it wouldn't it be great if cap rates were 3.5 today? But that said, if what we're representing here is if your cap rates move, you know, 15 bips, you can be at a project that's returning an internal rate of return of 17, and then you could be down to a 13.77, and that difference is go or no go. And so there's a variety of impacts as to when you're modeling these things out as to what will make it work and what won't make it work. The difference really in multifamily from an investment standpoint as compared to condo is condo, you primarily would get your forward sales, lock in your revenue, and lock in your costs at the same time. The challenge for investors on multifamily is it is a build it and they will come. We're not going to go out and pre-lease 3-4 years out. We're going to pre-lease 6 months out. And subsequently your capital stack can't be, leveraged to 90% because you can't borrow on deposits like in condo. So it's a more capital intensive build than condo. And that's why you have to be very sharp in terms of your speed, your time, your costs, all your assumptions. So this really shows the impact of rent, time, and cap rate. Again, dated information, but sort of give you the essence of the decision process. And then this slide is what I was mentioning on time. So, if we extend our project period, and this is just in construction side, by 3 months. So just 3 months in time on construction, you go from a 17.6 IRR to a 16 internal rate of return. And I think that's something that everybody likes to talk about. Oh, interest rates. These projects can stomach an interest rate increase. They can't stomach time and cap rates. And so it all has to work collectively. But to Tegan's point, it's the institutional money that has the pockets and looking for the right partners to take on these types of projects. So I'll leave it there. One thing that Grey Corp is focused on is ESG on all of our projects, then us as a company as a whole. But with that, I think it's time for Q&A. So thank you, and sorry about the slides, everybody. I apologize for that. Gotcha. I'm mute, Tegan.
Des, if you could go ahead and put the three of us on the screen, that would be wonderful. So Des is going to go ahead and pin the three of us. And so what I wanted to do now is really open the Q&A period. Please go ahead, add your questions in the chat. Again, I mentioned that we did receive some questions in advance, which were awesome. And I also tried to cover them off, but at a really high level, there were some very detailed and specific questions. So feel free to go ahead and share those with us. We really look forward to hearing that. And I really want to thank all of you. Again, we have a very diverse group here today, and the Q&A is a really important opportunity for different groups to hear different perspectives. We've got Ministry of Transport, TransLink, we've got REITs, developers, we have nonprofit organizations represented, we have design professionals, engineers, and so hearing your questions is really, really important. It's really important for people to understand what's on the mind of other colleagues that they have in the industry. I'm not seeing any questions. Is it just my chat, or do we have crickets? Are there any questions? No? Okay, well, I won't belabor it. If there are no...
I've got a question.
Yes, Gary.
Gary, okay, look, these are all pretty big projects you're talking about, and I'm focused on Vancouver, in fact, the North Shore, where they've lagged behind significantly. And I know this is a transportation-focused issue, but and we're, clearly a lot of new legislation. Clearly, we have NIMBYism prevalent in more communities than not. And part of the problem, you're not addressing this, is the public reaction and the education that needs to go on. There's lots of misinformation. And one of the things I'm trying to do in West Vancouver is get the facts out so you get more, let's call it proactivity, positive views to development and understanding it, and understanding how you can get the lower cost housing. So I appreciate you're working on big projects, but in many cases, we've got smaller communities that need smaller projects. So not 100, but maybe 50 to start, because you're not going to put 100 units in West Vancouver to start. You might be able to get 40 or 50. And so that's one question about how to approach that. The other question is how to, let's call it, create a new transportation hub. So on the North Shore, for instance, and I'm sorry to be so specific, but it's what I know, although I've lived in Greater Vancouver for many years. You've got, your Park Royal hub, you've got, the Horseshoe Bay hub, and then they got the North Vancouver hubs. Well, what about creating another hub in between on North Shore? You've got schools, for instance, that attract huge amounts of traffic and I'm getting off of Marine Drive, right? Because we all know about the Marine Drives and the kind of existing hubs, but it seems to me you have to create hubs, new hubs around existing hubs, which were the schools, really, in many of the community schools. I grew up in Langley, so in Langley you've got a number of hubs. You've got Aldergrove, you've got Langley, you've got Fort Langley, Milner, and Willoughby, etc. So how do we kind of bring us back, let's to the future in a sense, to kind of go back these hubs and say we need some density around these hubs, and some of them might need more transportation. Let's call it, obviously need transportation links, and kind of almost push new transportation links or hubs to come in with a definition so that it's easier to convince, let's call it, the locals that the density is not kind of all over the place, but it's around hubs, makes sense from a transportation economic point of view.
Okay, great. Thank you for great questions. And I think they're interlinked. So I'm going to start off with your transportation hub question. So basically the framework for transportation in Metro Vancouver is provided through TransLink and in coordination with Metro Vancouver. So you have the regional transportation plan and then the North Shore area transit plan. And the OCP is the municipal framework that fits into the Metro Vancouver strategy. So what happens with land use and transportation planning in our region is that it's coordinated. And so we have a frequent transit network plan that's been in place now. I worked on it when I was at TransLink many years ago. And so if you want to understand more about kind of what drives it, there's a transit-oriented communities manual that I think we produced in 2009 that will provide you with a good framework for how and why that planning happens in that integrated way. But it's a very entrenched land use and transportation planning framework that's been in place now for many years in this region. And that framework is what the province has built on in developing their transit-oriented area policy and guideline. Okay, so they're saying these are the transportation hubs. This is where there's a bus loop. This is where there's a rapid transit corridor. And then basically building out from the top down, a land use strategy. Now, it's not perfect. There's lots of things about it that are strange, like in Richmond, part of one of the concentric circles is across a river, so it doesn't make sense. But the intentions are really great in terms of making really efficient use of the infrastructure that we have in place. Things like schools, they are trip generators, and they're certainly can provide great community infrastructure. And those are considered as part of the municipal plan, and the OCP and Ambleside plan and all of those things. But they're part of that integrated planning framework, it is complex, and it's probably actually a good workshop that I could do, a recorded webinar to help folks understand, but it's very complex. In terms of your second question around smaller units, again, I would just look at the transit-oriented area. I would actually watch the webinar that was done back on so that's the regional, that's a copy of a framework there that Derek's referencing. But when we're talking about your second question, so different question here, which is around the smaller units and so forth, I would recommend watching that other webinar that is on my website under resources, current issues, and it's the new housing statutes. That will give you a good overview on that one. That was from December the 4th. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you, Gary, for getting us warmed up. We've got some questions coming in, which is awesome. Awesome. Okay, so what are your thoughts on the recent March 8th 2AA policy manual update? That's a great question from K and E, and perhaps I actually haven't dove into those details. And so maybe K and E, you could provide us with an overview of what was involved and what your thoughts are. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. Okay, Connie, can you explain why a landowner would want to go through the permitting process for the project via the Uplift Fund? Okay, great question, Connie. So basically there's a capital gap. They can't get their project through the permitting process because they don't have the money. They don't have the capital. They don't have the money to actually close on the land or to invest in all of the design costs and you know, to create the beautiful design that Liana was showing. There's a cost involved in that. And so they need capital on the front end, and they can't get access to that capital until they've gone through the permitting process. So they're in this chicken and eggs. So this is why it's so critical to unlocking housing supply. This is why I believe that the Uplift Fund is really necessary.
Thank you, Tegan. I'm just wondering, if as a landowner, would people just want to sell it to a developer and the developer would do the permitting process? Like, what's the advantage of the homeowner doing it? Mhm.
Well, and there's that, yeah, for sure, they would want to sell it to a developer, but this developer doesn't have the capital either.
I see.
So basically, if you're a developer, you want to do as many projects as you can, but you can only do so many because you only have so much capital. So Uplift Fund is providing capital to help more projects happen.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And absolutely, Uplift is partnering with developers. It's an essential part of it because I'm not a developer, so it's an essential part of it. Okay, how do you think this will affect smaller single-family lots that are in the TOA zone? We focus mainly in the new multiplex type projects that are in Vancouver and hopefully the same in other municipalities. So yeah, I mean, there's going to have to be consolidations. So this is where the municipalities are really busy right now doing their planning for these transit-oriented areas. So we think of the Broadway plan and the years of work that went into that. All the municipalities need to do that. They need to figure out, you know, how many towers can we fit in a block? What are the consolidations? What are the infrastructure constraints? Where are the stations? What is the public realm that we want around those stations? And so all of those things mean that municipalities are going to be really, really busy doing that planning work in advance of receiving development applications. So developers that are wanting to do consolidations, if they can be really strategic and prepare those plans and bring solutions to the municipalities, I think they'll be in a really good spot. But yeah, no, there's also opportunities for some of those parcels. You know, the municipalities will prefer that they're not orphaned, but there are going to be opportunities for multiplex in some cases as well. Does that answer your question, Janvin? Okay. Okay, Connie, question for Derek. What are the hard and soft costs for building 20-story condos in Vancouver West Side?
So, you know, right now we're between $500 and $600 hard, 300 soft. Land anywhere between. It depends on your location, but you know, you want to be between 150 and 250 depending on its location. So that's where my $1,000 a square foot came in before.
Okay, Scott is asking, how will these projects be affordable based on average incomes? My assumption is the marketplace can only pay so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take that one if you don't mind. So 530 is actually low, Scott, for the market. Throughout Vancouver, you kind of have two options. One, you can build condo, 70% of your building and 30% social housing. Or you go market rental, 80% of your building's market rental and 20% is below market. So 20% of every unit that we're doing in Vancouver right now is below market, which is 20% below CMHC, and that works. So it's fantastic to have that option for Vancouverites and for the city. 80%, it does seem high. What you do is you build efficient. You build, and there's an anecdote I keep going to. I just rented my own condo out. 2 young folks. One's working for, I didn't know this, but we have 200 engineers in an electric car company in Yaletown, Rivian. And then another at a lesser of a construction company, Ellis Dawn, doing the estimating. And household income, both under 30, 250,000. So they could afford the $5 a square foot, and they're deciding to live together. Then when I did that process, it was over Christmas. I had empty nesters, I had families, I had doctors, I had lawyers, I had an unbelievable healthy mix of demographics that were happily going to pay that price. So there's a market, there's an economy, there's a demand.
Hey, Sabrina. Sabrina, would you be able to just provide some context on your sharing of the TransLink project consent process guide?
Sure. I just thought, thinking about the crowd that's here and talking about TOD, TransLink does that. The document that I shared is if there's any development that occurs within 10 meters of a transit asset, be it the SkyTrain, be it a station building, the proponent, let's say the person advancing the project, would need to engage with TransLink. The perspective is from the perspective of just protecting the asset to ensure, let's say if there's a big hole, that there's no cracks that happen in the infrastructure. So it's from that perspective where they do like a technical and engineering review to make sure the asset is protected. So if it's a large development and it's like adjacent, they could be monitoring for vibration. And Derek is kind of nodding, so we've probably been through this. There could be like stop work kind of measures if it goes that way. But yeah, basically high level, it's a guide for anybody. It's a public document. Can give you a good starting point for anybody considering developing close to transit.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing it, Sabrina. Okay,
No.
Linda has a question for you, Derek. Understood that purposely built multifamily for rent is capital heavy and IRR might not compete with the condo for sale. But with the rent increase on the horizon, do you think multifamily rental properties in REITs to help with the issue?
Yeah, great question, Linda. REITs right now from a publicly traded entity aren't necessarily being able to raise capital at accretive to their share price. So right now REITs are waiting on the sidelines to invest in development. They're fundamentally, they see that the real estate that these projects work from a pro forma basis, and they want to invest, but it's their own capital markets issues, not the fundamentals of projects themselves. So as soon as the capital markets start to turn back on, real estate becomes more people are investing in the REITs, they'll be able to raise more money and place a bit more. But yeah, that's definitely a source of funding for sure.
Okay, awesome. Okay, Jamie, do you have any insight as to when we will get clarity regarding tower projects to be delivered as strata rental below market rental in the TOA areas? It's okay. So first of all, it's really going to depend on the municipality and the resources that they have in place in order to how much thinking they've done in the area, how much they know about the infrastructure requirements in the area, all of those different issues, multimodal considerations. So I would say it depends. And I'm getting a lot of requests right now for development feasibility studies. It was very quiet for a while. And within the last 2 weeks, some days I've actually had 3 a day of people reaching out to get more certainty about what they can do with their land. So it is really like the $1 billion question. is the timeline. And again, it's very constrained by resources and the labor shortage, and the municipalities are struggling with staffing. It's a difficult time. Is there any other questions? Any other questions? No, okay.
I can ask a question if it's okay in the last.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Just thinking about kind of actually your role taken in some of this, right, in facilitating projects going forward, thinking about sites where it would require property owners to come together, like let's say single detached home property owners wanting to come together and partner with a developer. So I find in working with groups like that, like having a single point of contact, having like a single decision maker, and having the authority to bring the group forward is always a challenge, like from the authority side. And I'm wondering if, you know, kind of your line of sight on that in terms of helping individual property owners come together and be able to take advantage of all this TOD and TOC emphasis in BC.
Totally. And I think that it's really common for there to be joint ventures on complex projects. So there's the two biggest ones that I've done in my career. One was the Exchange Business Park in Abbotsford, where we had multiple levels of government and also multiple property owners that were involved, and a JV between a developer and a pension fund. So yeah, I think it's really common. And that's exactly what I do, is facilitate. Basically what I'm at this point in my career is a facilitator of complex projects and bringing the different stakeholders together. And then I'm the single point of contact with the government entities, because somebody has to be speaking the language and understanding what the whole game plan is. And then, you know, translating it and bringing it back, and then working together with the ownership group to reach a consensus, and then working with government on that. So it is complicated, but I mean, it's required. There's no easy sites left. And with the cost of land and the opportunities, it's the right thing that people stay in as long as they can in their land. Yeah, for sure, Sabrina. Thanks for a great question.
Tegan, was
Yes,
she
Gary.
asking something a bit more granular, and that was bringing together 4 or 5 homeowners together?
Gary,
Because
I'm gonna have you stay on the line. It's 1 o'clock, and so we're going to wrap up the webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I have put a link in the chat to the feedback form. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Derek and Leanna, for all of your expertise. We really appreciate it. This session is recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording, even though you were here. So feel free to share it with your colleagues and with your networks. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.